Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm here with Mark Creighton. He is the CEO of Avado, which is a professional learning and development organization. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very much looking forward to it.
Yes, thank you. So you and I go back in less professional contexts, shall we say.
It's a very good way of putting it.
So yeah, we've known each other for a while, but you came onto First Human, who sponsors this podcast. You came onto one of our webinars, and we were talking about what does leadership look like in this new context. And I thought some of the stuff that you shared was really insightful, got me thinking. I thought let's get you on the show and go a bit deeper with some of those themes. So for Avado, then let's just sort of set a bit of context about your role and what's changed in the landscape for Avado over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of the people kind of listening around kind of businesses at the moment have said this has been completely shifted their view of kind of what they do and kind of what they do in their business. And certainly for me, if I look back at the start of 2020, I very much saw this as kind of doing a bit more of the kind of classical CEO work, a lot more of the strategic side of things, thinking a little bit more about the business in the longer term. And I guess what the pandemic did straight away was it completely shortened that view. So the first thing was almost set all those things aside and really get on that kind of almost 30-day kind of cycle to start off with, which then pushed out a little bit more to sort of 90 days. So I would have said, like, coming into the year, very much thinking about kind of the long-term future, where we're going to take the business. And the pandemic completely kind of brought that into that kind of almost what's the next step along the road. I think the other interesting observation I'd had was also kind of almost seeing the pandemic as starting again. So the one thing I did as a CEO initially was, all right, okay, how am I going to get back to where I thought we would be at the start of the year, whether it was the budget or whether it was kind of what we'd laid out with our investors, and very quickly realized I can't do that. I actually almost have to start again from here. So draw a line, stop comparing back to kind of the start of the year and what you hoped for, and almost build a new plan. So what is that new plan going to look like in terms of kind of the business? What will be relevant to customers, employers, learners? And also kind of what is that going to mean for you financially as well? So it took me about sort of a week to realize that I wasn't going to be able to compare back anymore, and then really kind of think, right, start again. And that actually I found it very freeing. I found it kind of released me to then go, right, okay, you create kind of a new framework for what this year is going to be about rather than the one you started with.
Right. And so that was from a strategic planning perspective. It sounds like the cycle shorted right in. And I know in terms of your style as a leader, how did that shift? How has that evolved over the period?
I mean, the biggest difference is the communication. I mean, I thought I was quite a good communicator. I would do those kind of monthly stand-ups. I'd send out kind of the fortnightly email celebrating the things that we'd done. I kind of did that. The pandemic has kind of got me thinking on a completely different level, in terms of communication. So with my leadership group, we meet daily. We have that kind of daily stand-up. So in that kind of more of an agile working model.
Is that something that you've adopted as a result of this?
So we got lucky, actually. We started testing it in late November, and we found it was a really, really positive way of working. We all were a lot more accountable to one another for what needed to get done. We just had more visibility of the things that were important, and we were more challenging in the conversation we were having as an executive group versus kind of doing just a weekly status meeting. And as it was, when we got into kind of this situation in March, it helped us to do things far faster. We almost were in this rhythm of doing it, and we were able to kind of very quickly make decisions. I think the directness of the conversation we had with one another was really good. Even if we disagreed, we knew we could do that because over the previous months, we created this kind of way of working with this kind of daily cadence. So definitely that helped us. I think if we'd had to start that from sort of March and from when the pandemic kicked in, that would have been a lot harder. So yeah, I mean, I'm a champion, and I have to say I was a bit unsure about it. The idea of meeting for half an hour every day, crikey, how are we going to fit that in? Is it really going to move things forward? And very quickly realized that it was. And also it was a model you could keep challenging. So you keep saying, is that really the priority? Have we really got the right things on that list that we're working on this week? I found the retrospective, so the reflections at the end of each week, really positive, because it got people talking about how they felt about what we'd done. They were more expressive about when they were disappointed things hadn't happened. Good way to check in on where their mental well-being was. So I think definitely if we hadn't have sort of had that practice coming in, the benefit we've then had through the pandemic wouldn't have come about either. So I'm a real advocate for it. It takes a bit of structure. You've kind of got to sort of stick with the stand-ups and all of that side of things. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we would have come through as well had we not had that. And then on a broader level, this communication with the company. So I do a weekly company update every Wednesday morning at 9:30. It's half an hour. I do an update, and then I take questions. So I take questions over chat. And then I have someone who's producing that particular session. So they literally come on and they ask me questions out loud. And we've been really clear that whether you want to ask a question anonymously, you want to give your name, we are going to give you a response. So if I can't fit in the half an hour we've given there, we write written responses, we post them out on our kind of SharePoint internally, so everybody can still see the answer. And we've made sure that we haven't avoided any of the questions, because obviously there's been some really difficult ones through the pandemic. And what I've been surprised about is I wouldn't have advocated that type of transparency going in. We've been very transparent around numbers. We try to give people an understanding of where the business is and therefore why we're taking the actions we're taking on a financial level. But actually by giving that, I think there's been more understanding and respect for the decisions that we've made. Doesn't mean everyone agrees with them, and I don't expect to come back from it, but it certainly has allowed people to understand where they're coming from. And it's meant the questions that we've had, I think, have been completely fair, and all they've asked for is, can you explain that a little bit more? Can we understand when that might happen? And also being able to admit that you don't know. So I think, this is where I would say I get a bit frustrated when I watch the television news and I hear leaders trying to say they know what's going to happen. Well, clearly we don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, if you don't know, you've got to say, I'm really sorry, I don't know. I don't know whether the Prime Minister is going to, take the lockdown away. I don't know whether or not sales within a certain part of our business are going to increase again, because there is nothing for me to compare it to. All I can tell you is based on the insight we have right now, this is the action that we're going to take. So, in that respect, I think those communications have been powerful, and now I see that as a pattern. I see no reason for us to ever stop doing sort of those weekly updates, but also looking for other ways to communicate as well. So we're definitely doing more working groups on specific topics, and we're inviting more employees to be involved in those, and saying, rather than make decisions and formulate decisions from, say, I know, top down, we know, therefore this is what we're going to do. We're definitely saying, right, we're going to run some working groups on this. We're going to get your feedback. We're going to take those insights, and that will be an input into formulating the plans for either for you as kind of colleagues, or whether or not it's products we're developing, the way that we're going to work. Those insights from you are going to be really valuable to where we go in the future.
Yeah. And so there's tons in there that I'd love to dive into, actually. But one thing immediately springs to mind is this being less certain, right? And being open that you don't know. So it's interesting that your colleagues seem to have been responding positively to that. How about the money men or the money women, right? The investors. Have you been able to be as candid with them?
I mean, they were actually the people that said, draw the line. So,
okay.
I actually, my first reaction was, they're going to be the people that want me to get back to what I promised at the start of the year. And actually, they just immediately said, draw the line, start again, right? So give us a view of what you think the business can be now going forward. And we will understand if that changes, because that is going to change. So I was fortunate. I know that not all investors are either that patient or that conciliatory in kind of giving, saying that's the way we're going to do it. So by doing that, that really was very empowering, because I could immediately say, right, okay, let's build bottom up based on what we can see. And then what we did, again, back on a communication level, we were having board calls every 72 hours for the first 3 weeks. We then moved out to weekly, and we've sort of slowly moved that back as we feel that we've got richer insight, better understanding financially. They feel they have less questions. They've kind of got that confidence in the new sort of outlook that we have. So I would say that I was fortunate, but we also made sure that the communication aspect was really frequent at the beginning, because we knew that the information that we had a level of volatility to it, as everybody. And you talk to your customers, say, in that first week, and they're not sure where they are. You talk to them again the second week, they're a little bit firmer. So you've got to be able to factor that into what that then means for your business. So you're giving that, you're giving your investors that information all of the time. So yeah, I still think communication was really important, but I was equally so fortunate to have an investor that kind of saw what was happening, was able to give me the advice early on kind of how they then wanted to structure what we were going to do.
Well, that's interesting, because often when this theme of being more open with uncertainty or embracing uncertainty can work at certain levels of the organization, but it becomes a lot harder at the top and more senior levels, because there is that demand for certainty. And yet it seems like you've achieved some level of
I know that's a two-way street, isn't it? Because I know, equally so, I've talked to people who have investors who literally just sort of said, no, that's what you said you'd deliver, find your way back, and I think that for me, that doesn't kind of show an understanding that this is it's not a recession in the way we've seen before. You can't go to a historic point in time and say, there's the model, this is how you come out of it. This is completely different, because you have several different factors affecting why you're seeing a business challenge. It's not just an economic one, it's not just a market one. You've got the societal impacts. So you can't judge it, or you can't frame it from one of those things that you may have modeled before. And I think, therefore, it would be unfair on anyone, for an investor to say, well, just get yourself back there, because, go back to 2008, map it out off that, and you'll figure it out, because it's got too many different dynamics to it. So I think the only thing you can do then is kind of create your base scenario. And then as you get more information, as you get more insight, as your model begins to take on board information, you can begin to update it. And for us, for example, we've seen a completely counter-cyclical kind of experience during this sort of time period. So we have a particular part of our business which is all direct selling to individuals. So it's learning programs delivered virtually. And around this time of year, it tends to be a quieter time of year for us. The kind of major focuses for that are January and September, start of the year, start of the academic year. That's in a completely sort of reverse trend. People are definitely going out and securing learning for themselves right now, either because they're on furlough, they've got time to learn, they've been made redundant, so they want to learn because they want to create a bigger opportunity to be employable. Now, I couldn't have looked at anything in history that was going to tell me that was what was going to happen. So I had to judge it. We had to judge it week by week. So is this going to last? And each week, is that enough rich data that we can forecast a bit further forward? And do we need to create capacity in different parts of the business, because this looks like it's going to keep going as a sort of counter trend? So there's nothing I could have looked at historically that would help me to have seen that. But then you have to live with that information, build as much insight as you can, and then figure out whether or not how long it's going to last for. So I think it's harder when people are saying, oh, well, you can model that off history, because clearly, that isn't, I don't think that's what we've seen. I don't think a lot of sectors have seen any sort of model they could have sort of drenched up and said, right, okay, we'll use that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that you talked about, which is very interesting to me, is that you've taken some of these practices that software teams have been using for like a decade or more, and these agile practices, and we've had a lot of agile experts on this show, and you're using it with the management team, right? And that is still, right now, relatively novel for management teams to be applying some of these practices. So tell us a little bit about how that came about, and then maybe a little bit of the mechanics of running those daily stand-ups and the retrospective, and how they might be different for a management team versus, say, a software team.
Okay, so I'm not a software person, so I'm not for a second going to suggest that it was me. You're not going to be surprised to hear it was actually our chief technology officer who had been running this within his technology team, who's came to the executive and said, I think this would be valuable. And we definitely had strong feedback from that team and some other teams that had tested it that was really working. So he very much brought the model and piloted it within the exec. He was very much kind of the person that kind of kept us on the discipline, told us what we could and couldn't do, told us off when we didn't do what we should have done. And that was kind of how it was kind of brought forward.
And so what are those norms then that maybe you had a bit of getting used to?
So obviously you don't, when you do your stand-up in the morning, if you've got a task, you only talk about the task. You don't discuss anything else till you've finished talking about the task you need to do. That's any other business. And of course, leaders always want to talk about things. Let's debate that. No, we haven't got through the stand-up yet. When we're through the stand-up, there's an A or B section which we can talk about stuff. So that kind of thing of being cut off with someone saying, no, that is beyond the task we're talking about. we're going to do the next task, we'll go through the tasks first, and then we'll do kind of any other business. So the discipline really of using that half an hour in the right way, which is let's check where everybody is with the things that need to get done this week. Let's see whether or not anyone has any barriers to kind of getting those things done, need support from the rest of the team. Any reason why we don't think they're going to get done by the end of the week. So that discipline and kind of just sticking to that rather than it turns into a bit of a free-for-all, kind of a classic status meeting. I think that's one bit of discipline to get round.
And who's enforcing that discipline?
I sort of think we all are. Because we use Asana as a project management tool. That's where the list of tasks is. We're updating those every single day. We're adding in AOB that relates to the subjects individually as we all kind of input into that tool. So it is very kind of self-regulating, really. I wouldn't have said that any of us are an enforcer. And as it's gone along, we've been a lot more kind of managing. We know when, hang on a second, sorry, I've just dipped into something else. So you become a bit more kind of self-aware, I guess, of what you're doing. And then the retrospective sort of very much is a review of the tasks that we had for that week. What have we completed? What do we think we've learned from what we have and haven't completed? Were we taking on too much? Have we got the right priorities? When we look at the big things in the business, are the things on this list the things that we think are the big things to tackle? And we've also been really careful not to put things on that list that are kind of our individual tasks. So it's not a task list for every member of the executive. It is the tasks that we're collaborating on together that we think we collectively need to come together to make decisions on and kind of agree. So that definitely kind of is the way that we run it. But what I like from the retrospective is we talk about how we feel about it. And we talk about, do we feel this has been a good week? And why does it feel like that? And, I think opening up and talking a little bit more about when you don't feel it's gone well, it is not weakness, but it's kind of saying either I could have done with more support or maybe I took on too much. And therefore the watch out is that we don't do that again next week. Or there's this big thing that I've got to do on my own that I didn't realize was going to take so much time. And therefore, again, I didn't put that in the context of everything else that needed to be done as an executive group. So I find that kind of feedback, both, I guess, as the CEO, really important, really valuable, but also we're able to then help one another to say, well, maybe take less next week, or hang on a second, maybe we should have talked about that in one of the stand-ups because clearly, that was going to be a challenge for you and we could have helped. So again, it creates a more open conversation, and I do think, particularly during the pandemic, people have to talk about how they feel. So then you can take some time to talk about that. Okay, so why do you feel anxious about that? Well, I just feel like I can't get it done. Okay, why is that different? Because you're working remotely versus if we were in the office. Let's figure that out together. And I think you can't, I would say, being more aware and actually being a bit more deliberate about being aware of those things for everybody that's working for you, not just kind of your immediate team, but across your organization. That's really important. You've got to keep asking the question, are you okay? Is everything going okay? Okay. Or being a little bit more present on kind of things like Zoom calls and Teams calls of, why is that person not talking at the moment? Are they okay? Do they like what we're saying? Are they worried about what we're saying? Maybe I check in with them afterwards and make sure everything's okay because they're a bit quiet. So I think in all of this, the opportunity to check in with people and say to them, it's okay to tell us if things aren't working or you're feeling like you didn't get something done or you're a bit worried about stuff, because I think that makes it more sustainable. And I'm very conscious that this kind of crisis is something that's gone on for a long time. It's not something that was like a couple of weeks and then we're back to normal. This is both ongoing and may go on for a long time, and it may be that it goes backwards before it goes forwards. So you've got to kind of keep those levels of communication and conversation up to make sure that everyone's okay. And I got one particular thing at the moment, which is I'm trying to encourage everyone to take holidays, okay? Because everyone's waiting to go, I want to go on a proper holiday. Going, but maybe you need a break now, just to recharge, just to kind of shut the laptop and walk away from it. I appreciate you can't maybe go on that holiday you wanted to Spain or Italy or wherever it might be, but you do need a break. We all need a break. We all need to take time just to kind of step back from it all. So really trying to say to people, take some holiday, now or over the course of the next couple of months, because you probably haven't taken one since, say, February, in some instances since Christmas. And all those things, I think, are things you need to be more aware about, repeat, reinforce, because people get in a pattern And this is a pattern that sort of is going on a bit longer than any kind of business continuity or type of crisis situation that I've ever seen before.
Right. Yeah, I could certainly relate to the holiday point. I'm not sure. I've definitely postponed a holiday. I'm probably overdue one. And the this retrospective. So, do you think the fact that you were opening up more in the retrospectives, and was this your CTO saying, adding some sort of questions into this format for the retrospective? That
I mean, it's structured, so we all individually have time to feedback about how we feel our week has gone, and that's it's a round table, and everyone says something. So it's not one of those things where who wants to talk, who doesn't want to talk. Everyone is asked to say something and contribute something in a time frame. So we don't go on for 2 hours. We give half an hour to that part of the retrospective. So I think it's just sort of, again, maybe I'm forgetting how it was at the beginning. I'm sure it was stilted at the beginning, because I'm sure it was a bit sort of, what do they want me to say? Everything's fine. But I certainly would say, the retrospectives we've been having over the last sort of 8 to 12 weeks have definitely been kind of very honest, very open, and people are really sharing about where they are relative to kind of the work that we've been doing, and challenging as well, and I really value that. I really value the challenge, because it's quite a fluid situation. It's been kind of lots of information kind of suddenly becoming available, and us using that. So I guess the mindset is also that you're open to that, and you accept that we aren't getting everything right, nor should we be getting everything right, because it's not that type of environment, and cutting ourselves a bit more slack on that. So, okay, well, we can only learn from it. We can't change it. We can't go back. But I think the kind of sense of we're going to be perfect, or we're going to get close to it, be realistic about what this situation means you can do, which we should have been more realistic anyway. But I think this kind of pandemic brings it into sharper focus.
Yeah. And so do you think that more candid, more open conversation in these retrospectives then spilled out into your style, more generally? Or do you think you always had that kind of attunement to what people were feeling and, concern there?
I think it's something in my say leadership that I've always wanted, but I've never been consistent in. So I've always felt that if I was a lot more present with people, and I was listening, and I was asking more open questions, and I was looking for some of those signs about where they were as people, as much as kind of the role that they were playing in the organization, that I would be a better leader, and I would be more responsive to what they might need from the organization, or for me as a manager, or for me as a leader. What I know is maintaining the consistency of that and staying present for anybody is challenging, and it's tiring, because you're giving quite a lot, both emotionally and mentally, when you're trying to say that switched on to how everybody else feels. So I know that in the past, sometimes I've kind of come away from it to go, well, I'll just get it done. You kind of get into that more task orientated mindset of, okay, well, maybe it's just some things you just need to get done here, and you switch off a little bit that kind of the emotional radar to sort of go, just need to get some work done here. And also probably, if I'm honest, to insulate yourself a little bit, because you go, taking on people's feelings in itself means that you carry their feelings around with you, which means it affects you. And I think anybody who suggests it doesn't is crazy. So what you do is you kind of go, well, I can take it for a bit, but then I'm going to have to shut down for a bit, and I'm going to need to work on some of the stuff, because I can't carry all of this. So I think in that respect, as a leader, this situation demands you being more open. But what I'm not going to pretend is that every waking moment I am as receptive as I could be. And it is a bit of kind of practicing that and making sure that you're present in the right moments, and that you are kind of almost consciously going, right, okay, how is everyone feeling? How is everyone doing? Because I've certainly realized that because you're not with people physically, you don't see that as much. You don't kind of see the body language that tells you, oh, hang on a second, you don't seem to agree with what we said here, or you seem a little bit distracted, or, you seem really keen on this idea. And you don't get that feedback as much, I think, through the way that we're working. So you need to check in. You need to be a little bit more deliberate. But even then, you don't want to call people out in front of the rest of the group. So you sort of then think, well, I'll pull away. I'll then go and call them separately. I'll check in with them, make sure that they're okay, and do it that way. And you just don't always get that right. Sometimes your judgment's wrong, and there's nothing wrong with me. There's no problem. There's no issue. Like, okay, maybe I was overreading. So yeah, I think I think as a leader, it's definitely something I aspire to. I do think I've always felt that good leaders show a level of vulnerability. They try and show their humanity. It doesn't mean that they don't make tough decisions, and I think that leaders do have to do that. They have to be able to separate those things. But I think right now, people want to see a diversity in people's leadership styles. They want to see more humanity. They want more connection, and they do want to see vulnerability. They don't. If you're standing there saying that you've got this and you absolutely know exactly what's going to happen, you can't be believable. But no human being, no colleague of mine is going to go, Mark's got all the answers, because I shouldn't have, and nor could I. So, but yeah, I think there's. I've always felt there was something about leaders acknowledging their vulnerability, talking about it openly to the people that work for them, can be a very, very powerful way of getting them to talk openly back to you.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating that this situation has, I guess, had you reflect on that to a greater degree than you may have done otherwise. So, hardest moment so far for you through this, and what have you learned from it?
So we were in a situation where we had to undertake a consultation around our business in April. We looked at the business dynamics that we had to face in the rest of the year, and we couldn't see how some of the models that the government had made available were actually going to help us to kind of carry that through. And we could see some of our products weren't going to maybe achieve what they needed to. So we went into a consultation relatively early, I think, versus some of what we're seeing kind of more broadly happening now. So first thing is that is always horrible. And I think it was particularly horrible because, you knew that the people that were affected were going to go into a market where opportunities were very difficult. So, but very much for us a last resort, having looked at kind of all the other ways that we could kind of realign our costs with what we're doing as a business. I think the thing I learned from it was just the importance of understanding it as a consultation and really listening to what people are saying as possible solutions coming in the other direction. I think sometimes when people talk about those difficult situations, they kind of almost work through them as a process and say, we just have to do this way. We know where we are, and we know what kind of the end point's going to be. But if you use the consultation process, I think, in the way that it's supposed to be used, you take a huge amount of feedback from the people that are involved. Obviously, they're all represented by kind of their colleagues. And we came up with a series of ideas, or they came up with a series of ideas to us about how we could mitigate, say, the losses of roles. So a lot of people came back and said, we're very happy to do job shares. Actually, I was thinking about going part-time. If I went part-time, would that allow you to keep somebody else in work? Here's some things that we've been thinking about as a team that we think can make us more cost efficient. And all of those bits of feedback meant that from going into that process, we made 50% people less, 50% less of people redundant than we thought we'd have to, because all of those suggestions and measures allowed us to get to what we needed to do, which was obviously to save costs to keep the business viable going forward. So I guess that would be my learning from it was, I think sometimes we see things like consultation process. They are very emotional. They are very difficult. They're very challenging. Communication was really critical throughout. We answered all the questions, however tough they were. As you would understand, they were coming from those individuals' point of view as well, which means they were emotional questions. They had their families, and people they had to look after. But by listening to the ideas that came back, I think we were able to mitigate some of the things that we originally thought we might have to do, which is a great credit to kind of all of the employee representatives that we had doing that process. But it just shows you the power of actually listening to what might the options be. And I think as I move forward, I kind of look at that and go, well, it's got me thinking differently about things like job sharing. It's got me thinking differently about kind of what do people mean by more kind of gig related roles and kind of what they might want. So I might want to have 2 to 3 roles in the future. Can you, as an employer, can you handle that? Can you respond to that? I'm a great talent, but I'm not going to give you all of my time. And we've got to start making these judgments, I think, about, well, do we need someone's talent full time? Or actually, are we comfortable with the idea that we have it for a couple of days a week? Or because that actually might be a fantastic outcome. They might deliver something in those 2 days that is mind blowing. But we're only going to get that if we can be open-minded to that opportunity. If we're not, then that talent isn't going to work for us. So I do think there are things that come out of this. And I think that the one thing people move to is, well, people need a job. And I go, I don't think they do. I think this will have changed people's perceptions of what they want from their working lives. So as employers, we're going to have to respond to the fact that maybe they don't want a full-time job. Maybe what they want from us is the opportunity to work for a period of time or at different times of the day. And if we're not responsive to that, then we won't be able to access that talent. So, I try and look at it a different way, I think, which is that, I think there is a level of empowerment here for people that want to have a different lifestyle alongside their work. And, progressive employers are going to have to be a lot more responsive to that.
Wow. And that obviously came out as a strong theme in the consultation. That
I think it said to me something about how people are thinking about their working lives. And one of the things I think about this pandemic is, and I'm sure time will tell whether or not it has a permanency or not, but I think people are reflecting on, well, what do they want from their work and their life? How are those two things going to work together? And how will they feel more empowered in that, rather than I have to work in a particular way, and I have to sacrifice other things that I really care about for that to work. I think people are going to be less willing to compromise, and I think they're going to look to employers to kind of respond in those other areas of their life that are important to them, so that the work-life blend that they achieve is more for them. And it's not, I think some people would say, well, that's fine if you're financially secure. But actually, I think it is a way of making yourself financially more secure, because in effect, what you do is you spread out your risk. You start thinking about, how you want to work in different ways, how you take employment from different points. If you want to try your own thing, start your own business, that becomes part of kind of the working week that you have. And how you do it is a little bit of a reflection of how you want to do it. And obviously remote working makes all of those things a lot more viable. So yeah, I think it was a reflection on that process, but it was also a little bit around, I think the pandemic it's not just the economic impact, it has the societal impact, it has the environmental impact. These will be things that you're talking about on other podcasts, but I do think it's something where the individual, if they can see this a particular way and in a long-term setting, will probably find it very empowering.
Yeah, I think that's probably right in broad strokes, but I guess there are equally some people are just like, damn, I've lost my job.
Yeah.
and it sucks. But I agree with that. And I think what's interesting is because it's hit everybody at the same time. I mean, there's been several people I've spoken to have said, well, my boss now has been forced to work from home, hated anybody working from home.
Yeah.
But now has seen for themselves how productive they can be. They've got a much better life. They don't want to go back to working 5 days in the office. So I think the fact that it's hit the whole hierarchy all at once is also going to be particularly impactful in terms of going.
And it's shifted across kind of the period of pandemic, because I would have definitely said that more sort of traditional kind of working pattern, those types of people were staying in that. We're going back soon. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll get this back to where it was. And, and over time, they have seen the benefits that you're talking about, and they have become advocates for it. And they've recognized all those things, those misnomers they were worried about, like accountability. We won't be as productive. We won't get the outcomes from the business. They've gone, well, actually, we are getting all of those outcomes. Those things are all working. People feel like they've got more time because they're not commuting or they're not having to travel. So almost the length that it's gone on for has allowed some of those things that probably people very much said, this is the way I work and I don't want to change. They've evolved as they've realized some of the gates or the barriers that they sort of perceived would be the problem of working remotely have kind of been taken away, because the evidence says, well, actually, none of those bad things that you were worried about actually happen. And also you're enjoying it because you feel like it's empowering you and you feel like you've got a better working sort of life. So in a way, the time it's gone on, I think, has really helped people to reconsider those things that they'd always previously believed.
Yeah. Now, tell us about your offices, because this came up on our webinar, and I thought you made some great comments about this. So, so what's happened with your offices, and what have you seen as a result of it?
So we obviously, having come out of the office, we were in a position where actually we had a lease on our London office coming up in September, and there was kind of a recognition that we weren't going to go back. So what we decided we would do is we would survey our teams actually across the UK. So we've got teams in the UK, we've got some teams in APAC as well. We'd survey our team across the UK, and we'd ask them what they want in the short and long term. So, if it's about the end of this year, how do you feel about going back to work? As in confidence, security, worries about traveling, etc. But also questions about, what if this was the way that we worked? So what if we said we were going to work in this way for a longer period of time? How would you feel about that? And there was an overwhelming response that said, on both the short and the long term, look, we definitely don't see ourselves working in an office 5 days a week. And actually a large majority, sort of well over, say, 80%, saying, I actually think I'll only work in an office a few times a week. And here's the things that I'll do in that office. And it was more around meeting colleagues, collaborating, thinking about how you develop new products, being creative. It wasn't about things like working on my own, having a desk, that kind of sense of, definitely a desire for a sense of community, definitely a desire of wanting to maintain the culture, but not, I need to come into an office every day and I need to work in that way anymore. So as a consequence of that, we started to look at, okay, could we see any customer challenges that we needed to address? We couldn't. Could we see any other kind of challenges that came from our partners? No, because we'd still be able to meet them. There were still models that we could use for that. So what we've started to do now is we said we won't go back into an office this year. So we won't, or let our lease kind of go. And we'll look for a different type of space going into next year that fulfills some of the things that people sort of want to do occasionally through their week. But it's not going to be back to a desk-based environment. That isn't what we're going to create. So we think we can create a hub for the business in London, which is where that office was going to kind of, where our main office is. And that was going to enable kind of these practices of meeting, collaborating, developing ideas together, having somewhere where you could drop in maybe if you were between meetings across kind of the city. But that would be the purpose of it. And it would probably be, I think we're looking at the fact that it will be a third of the size of the office space that we had before. So we're doing two things now. First thing we've said is that we need to understand what people need to work more effectively remotely. So we're asking people, what are their individual needs about the things that they will require at home, whether that's kind of technology, whether or not it's connectivity, whether it's kind of things like physical desks and chairs. What do they need? And therefore we can begin to invest in that. We're also asking questions about what do they need almost on an emotional level and the way that they connect with people. So, what does the company need to do in terms of how often we physically meet? So are we meeting, say, every couple of months for strategy sessions, company sort of community days, social events? What are the things that then need to formulate kind of a new sort of spine for our culture? Because our culture is really important to us. We know that physically being together would have been one of the manifestations of that. We need to make sure that we fulfill that in kind of this new model. And the second, so the last part of that is we've talked about it being a pilot. So we've said, look, we can make this decision now, and then we can keep asking you whether it's working for you on an ongoing basis. So if we find ourselves a year from now, and actually people are going, it's a bit different to when we were in that pandemic, and sun isn't shining because it's the middle of winter, and therefore I'm maybe not getting out and getting to do the things at home that I was, and actually I'm missing human contact, and I want to spend time. We can look at it, and if we need to go and get more office space, then we can factor that in. So what we're not doing is we're not going, this is it, final, we're never having an office again. We're acknowledging what people have fed back. We've acknowledged kind of that's some of that short term, but some of it is actually what they would like from working for us in the long term. And it's also then saying, well, it can be a pilot, so we can keep surveying you because your attitudes might change over time, and it will change because of this kind of relaxation of social distancing, but it'll also change when you get a feel for what this means for you as a human being and kind of how you interact with your colleagues.
So it's embracing uncertainty again, right? It's the same, That's the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, and then the final part I'd say is for those people that said, I can't work at home, I just can't be done. We are looking at how this office space that we've created or will create kind of from January next year still accommodates that. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want people's well-being, mental and physical, to be detrimentally affected by kind of piloting this remote model. So again, trying to be as responsive to those individual needs as we can be, because that's really important as well. I think the idea that you sort of say, right, the majority have said we're doing this, which great, that works for them, but we don't want to alienate those people that said they don't want this, or there's a reason why they can't work from home. And we've got means by which we can address that without necessarily having large kind of footplates of space within London. So yeah, I mean, I'd say we've made our decision in the sense of what we see the next sort of 18 months looking like, but not closing the door on the idea that people's opinions will change, and therefore we need to be able to respond to that by continuing to ask for their feedback.
Yeah, no, that's so a lot more prodigious use of surveying.
Yeah, and we followed up now to talk about individual needs, because we realize that you've got your macro numbers around kind of what people are saying they want, but you then need to sort of try and break it down as much as possible into those individual instances. And I think one of the things we're also thinking about is, well, how do you fulfill things like performance management? So if I'm not with my colleagues every day, the importance of my line manager one-to-ones, the way my outcomes are set, the way my outcomes are measured, when am I going to be able to give feedback on those things? I think they evolve when you're in a remote setting, and you need to recognize that that's going to be a big part of supporting the business when it's remote. It's not all just about, is everyone, you've got the physical equipment that they need to do their job to be productive. It's also, what about all of the kind of processes and protocols you had? Do they translate? Do they move across? Or do you need to evolve them? Because if you don't evolve them, then you're not really responding to your colleagues. You're not sort of saying to them, well, of course it's different. Of course it's not the same. So, and are there aspects of that where you go, no, that still feels like that needs to be physical. So therefore, where would we conduct that? How would we conduct that? How would that still be a really good experience for both kind of managers and kind of the teams that work for them? So really thinking about all of those different aspects, rather than maybe kind of what you think about when you're putting these temporary measures in place for a situation like the pandemic.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, the other thing that you didn't mention actually, but made me smile on the webinar earlier, was that you worked in previously creative agencies, right?
Yeah.
And you were telling me how you were desperate to get people out of the four walls, and this pandemic.
So it was. I mean, I worked in media and advertising for 20 years before I came to Avado, and we always used to have this conversation about creativity. And obviously, creativity is one of those very subjective things. But creative people will talk about, well, sitting me in an office, in a boardroom, in a meeting room, and asking me to create things is terrible, and we would actively say, well, you don't have to, go anywhere you want to in London, go to a museum, go to an art gallery, go to wherever you feel inspired, because you're being judged on the ideas. You're not being judged on where you sit and how you do it, because actually the idea is the thing that certainly the client wants, and that can happen anywhere, and we know it. But it was really hard. I never remember sort of ever thinking, oh, I can see rafts of teams going off to do their creative processes in Regent's Park, where our offices were based, going for a walk, a walking meeting, didn't see it, go and sit in the park, because people felt that I'm being judged. Like, if I'm not there, I'm being judged. Someone will be saying, well, where's X? And that the permissions, for all that we might say the permissions were clear, it wasn't really that wasn't real. It wasn't true. No, you haven't given me that. And the minute someone sort of called someone out for it, the whole thing fell apart anyway. Because the minute someone said, where have you been, you part-timer? Been away all afternoon. Well, immediately the other 20 people in that creative environment would go, well, I'm not risking that. I'm not going out. I'll make sure I'm at my desk every day. So it never kind of materialized, even though we all knew it was the right thing. And I think what's been brilliant about this, particularly as kind of the social distancing measures have relaxed, is I hear a lot more people saying, oh, I'm meeting X in the park for a walk. We're going to talk about this particular issue. Or the team's getting together, and we thought it'd just be nice if we could all kind of socially distance, just chat about, even if it's a status update, we're going to have one a month where we physically sit in the park while the weather's nice, and we're going to do it that way. And it's happening not because we're trying to force it to happen. It's happening because it's almost an alternative, but people feel confident that they have permission to do that. They feel that that's, now the knock-on benefit is that I would hope that innovation, the ability to think about new ideas, enhancing what we already do, grows as a consequence of people feeling that freedom, sensing that you're empowered to do that. That's what we want from you. And that isn't time wasted. That's valuable time. And that time is a combination of two things. It's a great idea could come out of it, but also you're going for a walk, which is brilliant thing to be doing right now when you could otherwise be sat in front of a camera screen for 8-10 hours a day. So I think in order that this is sustainable, and you're going to commit to a remote working environment, you've got to then be saying, well, there's got to almost be those different settings where people can do different types of thinking, because they're not going to do it sort of sat here in front of a camera screen, just as they weren't going to do it in a boardroom or a meeting room. So I think that, I'm hoping that one of the benefits is that in innovation and creativity, people who were struggling with the permission that they had, that's gone. That permission side of it, is someone watching me, that presenteeism that I heard people talk about, that is going to get pushed to one side, and we can genuinely have this kind of more outcome based kind of approach where people go, it doesn't matter how you got there, but what you've got to is brilliant. And that's kind of where, I think ideas, sometimes people always want to make it really systematic. Show me what you did, show me the workings out. And in my experience, it's never that linear, it's never that straightforward. So encouraging working in these different environments tends to be the spark and the catalyst.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for that as well, and I think this definitely gives people the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to take the leap here. And yet, on the flip side, you also see this surge in demand for sort of spyware on employees' computers. To the point they're measuring keystrokes. And which is just mad. It's you've got seems.
I mean, this is where I think you've got to determine what behavior you want, and I think the one thing that comes out of this period is like agility, adaptability, flexibility. Well, you're going to lose all those things if what you're doing is trying to police when people are working. My experience is that, I've not seen productivity drop. I've not seen people pulling the wool. I've not seen that happen. In fact, I've seen the opposite. I've seen people working harder. I've seen people giving more. I've seen people looking out for their colleagues more often and making time to socialize with them outside of work, on a Zoom call, in a Zoom party, whatever it might be. So you sort of go, why then, having seen those, if you were observing those behaviors, why would you want to put spyware on someone's, what do you not, I mean, that lack of trust for me is just, I just don't understand it, because I haven't seen anyone demonstrate to me in my company that's the way that people see this, or the way that people are approaching this, or so I think, I mean, the opportunity here is to drive more empowerment, more trust, more belief in people, and see what the outcome of that is. If what we're going to do is we're just going to make it, that we're going to get back to the kind of presenteeism bit, which is I clock on and I clock off, and I always hated that behavior. Never felt like something that was going to create a progressive organization. I mean, this was the opportunity to break that. So it is worrying to hear that that's the way that some organizations are going.
Mm. Right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything you thought I might have asked you I didn't ask you? Anything we haven't touched on?
I don't know if I thought you were going to ask it. I think the recovery, like I hear this word recovery being used a lot. And I kind of wonder if there's a bigger opportunity, because the way, when it's said, it's very much the sense of business and the economy. How do the numbers get back to normal? I do think, I would hope that the recovery considers kind of some of the other things that we've seen happen in society. How communities have looked after one another and what that means, and can that be sustained? The understanding of some of the amazing institutions that we have and what they achieve. Positive impact on the environment of not having planes in the sky and cars on the road, and okay, what can you learn from that? It doesn't necessarily mean that elements of it aren't going to come back, but you're cognizant of the positive impact that it has. So I guess if I don't think it's asking you to ask me a question, but I do think if we could think about recovery as businesses more holistically and all the benefits it has, I think it does a couple of things. I think it makes for a more progressive society overall. But I reckon there's loads of ideas in that as well. I think, the more you look at people's behavior through the pandemic, the more that you see opportunity and ideas about what they might want from businesses and services, but also how they might want to behave differently as they go forward in society. And how almost do you respond to that? And almost how can you be definitely an instrument of change in what they want to do? So I think this recovery, as I say, I sort of, when it's talked about, really talked about in a very kind of narrow sense. But if it could be thought about in a broader sense, and I think businesses need to do that as well, it could lead to some really positive kind of permanent change. And as someone who has children, I kind of look at that and go, okay, there's a real opportunity here. We've got to grasp it rather than kind of retrench to where we were before.
That's a brilliant point, actually. Yeah, and I hadn't considered that this isn't. Yeah, we only hear it. We only really think about it in terms of employment numbers, and of which, of course, is important, and GDP. But yes, this a broader definition of what, a recovered. Yeah, even the term. That's fascinating, isn't it? Recovery from what? From soul destroying work environments, brutal commutes. Yeah. Just to some other angles to consider recovery from. That's a great point. Okay. Thank you, Mark. It's been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate you making the time. So for people, it's Avado is the company which you lead. So professional development. Professional development, and you said something else at the start of this.
So Avado do. We are doing professional learning and development, and
professional learning and development.
And mainly in sort of things like the role that data and technology is playing in businesses, and that's kind of one of our big focuses. So we're looking at how people use technology in their roles, and not just those people that are specialists in technology as well. Often they are people that are working alongside those kind of very tech savvy people. But we're looking to give them confidence that actually all the work that's being done with things like data is something that actually, if they learn about it, that makes the organization more productive as well. So a lot of our engagements with companies really think about that transformation they want to go through as a consequence of technology.
Right, and they can come to you for development programs and training.
Absolutely.
And all the rest of it. So check out, and it's Avado.
AvadoLearning.com.
AvadoLearning.com.
That's right.
AvadoLearning.com. Check out all the courses and programs there. Once again, Mark, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you.